What's up, everyone? Today we are taking a deep dive into programming and specifically going to talk about how to choose sets, reps, rest and tempo. Yesterday we spoke about exercise selection. Today we're going into deeper program fundamentals. All right, if this is your first rodeo, my name's Yanni Baumeister and across the table from me is Phil White, Switched On Physio. We're graced to have him in the pilot seat today for this programming discussion. It's a very exciting time. We fought Rad off with big daggers and axes, and we're able...
I'm in the front row. I look like a regular-sized human compared to you guys again. It's exciting.
That's right.
I'm feeling like a big dog over here in the... in that front seat.
For those of you listening on the podcast, this is completely irrelevant.
Yeah, I'm usually in the second row of chairs, and with the fisheye lens, I look tiny.
Yeah, that's right. Right on cue, the phone rings.
Rad. Ruining the show even though he's not here.
So, guys, this today is sort of somewhat bringing in this program discussion in for a landing, and We've sort of prefaced this chat by talking about, how to approach programming as a beginner, and then yesterday started to move more into how to start selecting or progressing exercises to, push through that first plateau that you usually will face at around the 9 to 12 week mark. Initially, we made it very clear that the very first win comes from consistency. And for all newbies, it doesn't really matter so much the exercise selection. It's and the programming fundamentals. It's more just about consistency, turning up, doing the work, and building that habit. You get a really good result just from that. There's a lot of data that suggests that just by doing push-ups, if you haven't done them before, you'll develop strength at about a 30% improvement with no programming whatsoever, just repetition. So now we're going to talk about what happens once you've changed the exercises up and you're still not sort of getting a result. And this is really where things get a little bit fun when you're a program designer or a strength coach, because you start to manipulate the sets, the reps, the rest, and the tempo. And even for a physio, this is fun.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is the nuts and bolts of what you're really trying to get as a physio, is getting that load management right. So all of these variables we're talking about here is when we mentioned load management, like this is what we're talking about. This is, all these sets, reps, and especially the rest, I think, is an
underrated.
Yeah, underappreciated, underrated variable to just make sure you're getting that load management right, for not only for, I guess, like overloading certain movements, but also just making sure you're like overloading the mind in terms of technique around the exercise as well. And that's something that I get a bit excited about. So.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because we did tip on the supercompensation effect a couple of days ago, which is the body's adaptation process after a bout of stimulus, a bout of exercise. Initially, immediately after the exercise, your strength and performance actually drops off as you fatigue the body and you cause that damage, metabolic damage to the body. And then the body goes into this sort of arc curve where it comes back to the point at which you had given it the stimulus, and then begins to go beyond that point where your strength and performance increases, and that curve eventually starts to reverse and come back down, and the point at the peak of the curve is referred to as the supercompensation point. And that is usually, depending on the individual a little bit and depending on how they're recovering and things like that, is usually around 72 hours. And so we spoke earlier in the week about the fact that that's, from a macro standpoint, that's what recovery is all about. But today we're going to talk about how you can manipulate recovery in and of the workout itself, how doing different rest periods between sets and even reps can really elicit different responses in the body. Now, we're not going to go super deep. We're going to try not to go super deep in this. We're going to reserve the really, really deep, complex stuff for the discussion afterwards when we go live to the online coaching group. So for all of you online coaching, put your study caps on.
Yeah, this can get kind of like infinitely complicated because you can like build sort of the perfect program for just in the gym, but then if you have other sports or activities that you want to achieve outside of the gym, especially, that starts to get quite interesting about how you start to tweak these variables to make sure you're, I guess, building up your body in training, but then also performing at your peak outside of that. So if you have a half marathon coming up, or you're playing rugby every weekend, or there's so many ways that this starts to get really interesting and fun to program for, but pretty complicated. So we'll do a really good sort of fundamentals around how to do it with just the gym stuff in mind. But if you have that sort of deeper level complicated stuff, we'll probably have to leave that for today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or keep it for the online coaching.
Absolutely. Now, before we go on, I would like to give a quick shout out to everyone joining us live on the UMS Movement Mastermind private Facebook group. I know I can see we've got Lee Clements in here, and we've got a couple of other people watching, so let us know.
Promotion,
That's right, yeah. Let us know who you are, where you're tuning in from, and also for the guys listening on the podcast or watching the replay on YouTube, make sure you get yourself over to the Facebook group and join that group. It's welcome for all who are willing to agree to abide by the code of conduct. We keep it very specific to what we're talking about. We keep it very specific to exercise. We boot you out very quickly if you start to talk about anything else, because it's a very rapidly growing group. We got over 2,500 people in there, and we want to be able to see when someone is asking for help. We do not want to have to scroll through a bunch of crap to be able to give people coaching. And it's a coaching forum, so it's very important for us. So yeah, get yourself over there, join in, watch these live streamed. You can see the behind the scenes of us making an absolute mess of these podcasts, and see how big Phil really is.
That's it.
All right, so first and foremost, what we do here at Unity Gym to keep things as simple as possible is that we follow what's called an ondulating periodization model. Ondulating between...
And for those who don't talk like Yanni, we say undulating.
Undulating, yeah, all right.
You just have a really particular way of doing it, and it kind of took me a while to go, what are you talking about?
Undulating periodization model, where we switch between high volume and high intensity, and there is an inverse relationship between volume and intensity when you're training, and it's quite obvious. You can't lift heavy weights for lots of reps. You can lift lighter weights for lots of reps, and so there's this inverse relationship. So the body responds very differently to very high intensity with low reps. That's how we build strength, and very high repetition. Well, not very high rep, but higher repetition, higher volume, and lower weights is generally the quicker way to hypertrophy a muscle and build endurance in the muscle.
Yeah, and so I think it's kind of important to sort of frame, kind of simplify and get the big picture idea, which is basically that you, as we've talked about plenty of times before, your body gets good at what you spend your time doing. So if you only ever train sort of, really low rep stuff, really high rep stuff, it's unlikely that you'll actually, if your goal is to get really strong, unless you train low rep movements, you're not going to be able to hit those big peaks if you're just doing high rep sort of stuff. And the same thing if you're just doing sort of 3 rep maxes every week, and then you try and do a strength endurance activity, maybe like cycling up a hill, you're gonna have a really hard time. You're gonna be amazing on your first 3 pedals, and then you're gonna burn out really quickly. And so that comes from the different ways in which your body adapts to these different types of load, and that comes down to muscle fiber types, which you've probably maybe heard of colloquially as fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers. So that's kind of one part of it. And then there's also energy systems, which is about what your body's actually using as fuel. So whether or not you're in a kind of sugar burning phase or even a phosphocreatine burning phase, which is the immediate energy system, and then sugar, and then into an aerobic system, which is your fat burning phase. So it's really important to understand that the reason why we're playing around with these different reps is to try and elicit these specific adaptations to what we're trying to achieve. And when we're talking about becoming strong, flexible, and athletic at Unity, it's all about, I guess, becoming a balance of
well-rounded.
Yeah, well-rounded. Yeah. So you've got really great strength, but then you're also not just a powerlifter who gets walking up a hill.
Yep.
You can also be athletic in that you can handle the higher rep range sort of stuff, cardio, HIIT sort of exercise. Yeah.
And before the powerlifters shriek in disgust, you can hypertrophy a muscle by doing very high intensity, but it's the volume overall, the total volume of a workout that really hypertrophies the muscles. So for the guys who are always training in the 1 to 3 RM rep range, or even up to 5 RM, they still get huge, but their workouts generally last hours because they have a lot of rest between their sets, and the overall volume that they bank in that workout may still come close to an hour bodybuilding workout with high volume sets, but they're only doing 1 to 3 reps, you know. So there's a lot of evidence that suggests that it doesn't matter whether you do 1 set of 10 or 10 sets of 1, you'll still hypertrophy. The 10 sets of 1, you'll build a lot more strength than the 1 set of 10, but you'll have to rest a lot between each of those singles, and that blows out the workout. You can imagine that the 1 set of 10 will happen very quickly, and you're done, you know. Yeah. So I don't want to any of the strength trainers in here who really love their low rep ranges and high intensities. I don't want to sort of condemn you to a life of skinny frames. You are going to hypertrophy doing that, absolutely. And I prefer to train in those lower rep ranges myself. I think anyone with half a brain does, because it's just a lot nicer. Training for muscular hypertrophy, doing the sort of volume sets, training like a bodybuilder is horrendously uncomfortable, which brings me to answer Lee Clemence's question here. So DOMS is good. Well, it really depends on what your training goals, you know, because DOMS is a good sign for someone who's trying to get swole and trying to grow. It's one of the 3 elements to muscular hypertrophy. You need to create metabolic damage to the tissue, but more recent research sort of indicates that the delayed onset muscle soreness that Lee's referring to actually only comes from the eccentric contraction. So for a lot of strength training athletes that are really only focusing on the concentric contraction, think, for instance, people that are doing Olympic lifts, they don't lower the bar down slowly. They throw it up and then they drop it, you know. Those guys are exposed to far less delayed onset muscle soreness than a bodybuilder who's really slowing down the eccentric contraction
DOMS is a sign of basically the muscle when you're eccentrically contracting, so lengthening under load. It's basically the muscle fibers at a very sort of micro tiny level are getting little micro damage tears, and that's sounds like a bad thing. And if you you don't want to be muscle tearing, but if you're doing that in a controlled sort of way with the right sort of increase in load, that's exactly, it's the stimulus that will like demand a response from the body and a repair from the body, which is then what makes you come back stronger, and more
bigger and stronger.
Yeah, bigger. Like you'll get bigger muscles from doing that slowly. Like it doesn't happen just overnight, and you have to work for it.
Yeah.
And it will also make you more resilient to that sort of eccentric loading, which is really an important thing for other sports where you do need to control the lowering.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in essence, DOMS is generally a good thing. It's something that you will adapt to. It's something that is horrendously uncomfortable at first, but becomes something you sort of almost try to get as you get more and more experience.
Becomes a mark of a successful workout.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's how we sort of operate around here now, Lee, is that, if we're a bit stiff and sore after a workout, it's like, oh, that was a good workout. It's because it becomes, and anyone who's experienced, who's got a training age of probably over about 5 or 10 years will know that it becomes quite hard to find a stimulus that really forces an adaptation. You have to continually one up on yourself. And that is grueling at best, like we start to throw in, Alex Seabrook's going to get a good idea of this. I don't know if he's on the stream at the moment, but he's about to do my, well, it's not mine. It was, yes, that's right. It was Charles Poliquin's super accumulation program that I adopted and made work in Unity Gym. And Charles Poliquin didn't design it and make it up. It came from one of his mentors. And, it's just an insane amount of volume squeezed into 2 weeks, and then you spend 5 days eating and sleeping and recovering, All right, so Lee's saying abs, lats in the past. Look, you get DOMS anywhere. One of the best ones, if you ever do stair climbs on the way back down, we used to do insane amounts of stairs with weights loaded, and your calves just are ruined after it.
Yeah, and the important thing there is it's the going down there where you're controlling, you're eccentrically contracting your calves and your quads. You'll get it as well against gravity with extra load. That's classic sort of DOMS time. So
Yeah, that's right.
There you go. But we'll move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, we'll get to your question in a second. Dave's asking about flexibility training, which is a little bit different, and I'll explain why shortly. But first and foremost, what we want you guys to understand and take away from this is that the after your exercise selection, the first variable or the second variable, let's say the first variable is exercise selection itself. The second variable that we want you to start experimenting with is volume and intensity. And it's a really, really great way, and I believe the best way to continually adapt for an all-round, well-balanced person is to undulate between high intensity, low reps to low intensity, high reps. And high reps for me is 8 reps. That's plenty, you know. But depending on how experienced you are, if you're a beginner, high reps will be 15 reps, 12 to 15, you know.
Yeah, which I think is a good thing in many ways, because it's obviously you've got, I guess, a lower risk of when you're not confident with a weight. But the way I really like to coach high rep stuff with people who are new to an exercise is that often the hardest thing when you're new to an exercise is not necessarily the weight, but the technique.
Yep.
And I find that, you know, I'm not sure if it's just me with a short attention span, but after about, 5-6 reps, my mind starts to wander, or you kind of start to lose like the real concentration around exactly what you're doing. So it's just so common that I see people who are new to exercise, and it's a really common thing in physio. People just like, let's keep it safe in inverted commas, by just giving them low reps and high reps at low weight. And by the end, like, people have just lost interest and are so sloppy, just kind of getting through the reps for the sake of it, not actually doing really high quality stuff. So I'm often quite keen on lowering the rep range a little bit, and even just bringing it into, I was talking about this earlier in the week, but yeah, doing into like little micro sets within your
little clusters.
Little clusters. So say if you're doing 12 reps, which is, still fairly high rep, then maybe doing 3 sets of 4 or 4 sets of 3, and that way you can really keep your concentration for those 3s, little mental reset, count to 3 again, mental reset. And because I think that getting that technique stuff right is so important at a low weight if you want to progress to a high weight. Yeah, absolutely. And so the most sort of straightforward way that we do this when we're programming, we break the program down into on the big higher level, it's a macro cycle. On the macro level, it makes sense. On the smaller level, it's called a mesocycle, and that refers to a group of microcycles, which are usually always weeks. At Unity Gym, a microcycle is a week. It's a 7-day period, but it doesn't have to be. It can be whatever you're programming for. And when these get really, really specific is when you're training for a sport or an event, and you've got a specified time period to prepare an athlete for. Then microcycles, mesocycles, and macrocycles will be very much determined on the time frame that you've got to work in. For us, we program over a year. We plan for our microcycles are 6 months, and our macrocycles are 6 months, and then our mesocycles are 6 weeks, and our microcycles are 1 week. So that gives us a really nice period time frame to be able to work with our guys here. We don't really call them athletes, but I guess we sort of treat them like so. We turn driven people into athletes. That's what we hope to do, and yeah, that works really well. So the way that would look, and I'm going to keep this super simple because I'll talk a little bit in more depth to the guys in the UMS online coaching, because I don't want to overwhelm anyone who's sort of sitting on the outside wondering whether they want to take the plunge into their own programming and program design. Keep it super simple. Stay consistent for the mesocycle. That's the easiest way to do it. So you might do a full mesocycle of volume training, which is sort of anywhere between 8 to 12 repetitions, depending on your training age. As you're training, just a reminder for the mesocycle, that's 6 weeks in our example.
That's exactly right. Yep. So for the whole 6 weeks, you're sticking to that 8 to 12 rep range, and then usually you would drop it. And to drop it for an intensification period, for a new person, I'd really like the 5 to 7 rep range. For a more experienced person, I really like the 3 to 5 rep range. Anything below 3, I keep to a minimum, purely because of the extreme intensity that it puts on the body. I like to say it's competition rep range, and not many people train unless they're doing sub-maximal loading, which means that you're not lifting to your true 1 RM. You're kind of doing 1 RMs at your true 2 RM. And I'm going to do that today. For my training today, I'll be doing 1 reps on the deadlift, but at my true 2 RM.
Yeah, it's a way I really like to program, especially with sort of my physio patients, which is basically getting them to do like lower rep range, so they can really keep that concentration on doing the exercise right, form and technique. But at a, say doing their like 5 reps at their 8 RM weight, and that way they can really control it, feel confident they have a few reps left in the tank, and it's a great way of definitely getting stronger without and keeping to the goal of strength rather than going off into doing 15 rehab reps of boring exercise.
That's right. And look, the other variable that people don't take into consideration when they don't have a really good strength coach involved in their programming is the cadence of the movement, the tempo and the speed, the travel, the consistency. When you're training for maximal strength or power, which is also referred to as speed strength, it's very important how fast the object moves that you move, or how fast your body moves. For maximal strength, just overall brute strength, you want consistent speed. So they call it the bar speed or the dumbbell speed throughout the entire set. You don't necessarily want the last rep to be a real grinder. It's not like muscular hypertrophy where you're taking yourself to full-on neurological failure or neuromuscular failure. In strength training, that's quite dangerous to do, and it's quite a novice thing to do when you're still sort of figuring yourself out. So what we usually look for in Unity Gym is for maximal strength periods, we're looking for a nice, even, consistent bar speed throughout the entire set. And for speed strength, for our athletes who are actually preparing for rugby on the weekend or soccer, football, maybe a throwing sport, we look for maximal velocity at the peak point. So the rep might not be an even pace, and the set might not be an even pace, but we're looking for the fastest point to be a maximum velocity. And I know that's getting a little bit technical, but what I want you guys to understand is the lesson here is that it's not just about grinding reps. I want you to be taking into consideration when you're doing those intensification phases in your training, which is for a beginner 5 to 7 reps, or for an advanced person 3 to 5 reps. Then I want you to be thinking about how fast the barbell's moving. Is this a nice, consistent bar?
Yeah, there's a reason why there's tempo markings on, with testing. People are probably more aware of tempo this week than other weeks. Where,
that's right.
When you think about actually how long a 3-second eccentric is and how, kind of controlled a 1-second concentric is, and then playing around with the pause at the top and pause at the bottom. It's really important. Like, that stuff's there for a reason, and you get different adaptations depending on how you go about it. So with one of the super accumulation exercises that as part of that insane program, that's got a 6-second eccentric, is it?
5-second. 5-second eccentric deadlift.
5-second eccentric part of the deadlift. So that's in there for a reason, because you're really trying to get maximum sort of DOMs, maximum time under tension, that muscle micro damage to elicit response. Whereas you could see that when if you were maybe training in the weeks leading up to an event where you had to be really fresh, you'd maybe lower the eccentric component of it, maybe even adding a bit more of the sort of spring at the bottom of a rep for a squat, for example, trying to get your tendons sort of, nice and springy and used to that stretch shortening cycle. And then you're going to lessen the amount of pain you get from DOMs, and you're going to really work on the speed of the reps, and that's going to, prime you to move fast with load. So that tempo reading is there for a reason. It's
100%. And that's a great conversation that Phil's just started there. So tomorrow I'm scheduled to go and play 18 holes of golf with a couple of mates, And today I'm going to be doing super heavy lifting, but I'm not going to be doing any eccentric work at all. I'm going to be basically focusing on the concentric of my deadlift, the concentric of a front squat, and I'm not going to slow the tempo down on the eccentric at all. I'm going to be doing bench press today as well, and it's bench is not so bad, but if I was to really overload my lower back and my posterior chain, there's zero chance that I'd be able to rotate in a golf swing tomorrow, and I'd stuff my day up. So the way I train today is going to be very specific to what I need to be able to do over the weekend, and that's something that, as you start to dive into this programming stuff, you start to think about. If you do play sport on the weekend, then your training throughout the week should accommodate that. It should enhance that. It should optimize what you do on the weekend.
Yeah. 100%. And with the rest, we did talk a bit about it before with the macro sort of, how many days between exercise, but also within in between sets. I guess with the UMS program, there's the stretching component, which really helps people stick to the actual time of rest. I know it's been a big shift for me when I was training in a powerlifting gym, where they'd be pretty set with like the amount of rest, but you'd sort of sit on the couch, you'd chat to people, you'd sort of hang out, whereas with the UMS it's very efficient in using your rest period for a stretch. But it was interesting watching you train the other day when you were doing the deadlifts, the 180 for the 5 reps the other day, like
8 reps.
8 reps, sorry.
8 reps.
Yeah.
5 sets of 8.
5 sets of 8. But yeah, like the rest variable suddenly becomes this like huge deal. Like sometimes you just kind of don't think about when you're doing sort of submaximal stuff, but when it comes to getting heavy like that, 5 minutes comes around real quick.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I was literally taking 5 minutes rest between each set of 8 reps, and boy, it was only just enough. Yeah, I think the last set I took 7 minutes.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have got it out otherwise.
Yeah, so it's really important to understand that, like, for someone like Yanni who's really pushing to hit PBs, if you're following really strictly the rest period set about by the UMS program, you might have a bit of a struggle, especially towards the last few sets, to really hit the hit your goals. So that's an important thing to understand when you are programming for your peak weeks, and when you're testing, that rest becomes like a huge part of it.
It's very, very, very important. That's right. And that's why we also, during testing week, we don't combine the mobility or the flexibility training in between the sets. Also because of the issue that you've got, you're doing upper and lower body strength testing on the same day, every day. So we save the flexibility tests for the end of the workout when you're nice and warm and limber, and you're not going to interfere with the performance of the strength tests. And during the week, in the UMS online coaching, during a regular microcycle, we're always stretching areas of the body that don't interfere with the strength training of that day. And look, I hope that we've covered, because I know we sort of went out into the reads a couple of times there, but I hope we covered sets, reps. We certainly did with our undulating periodization model, and we've covered rest on the macro, which is that 72-hour goal or benchmark to get super compensation effect right, but also on the smaller, the micro, there are a few things that we didn't talk about with rest. Basically, the longer the rest period, the more recovery you get, and the better suited to high intensity training, but the less. It's funny. There's a little bit of research to indicate that the less rest you take between sets, the more it sort of stimulates testosterone production, and the more the better it is for muscular hypertrophy for a number of reasons, but. Once you start to drop below about 45 to 60 seconds, I think it starts to really interfere with your ability to lift, to stay above that sort of 70% 1 RM, which is where you get the right amount of stimulus.
Yeah, so you can see here it's always a bit of a, it's always about specificity, and it's a trade-off between different factors when you're choosing this. So that's why it does get sort of infinitely more interesting like complicated when you are looking at, you know, different sports or events you want to train for. So for someone who's doing something like a Tough Mudder event, where they're going to have to combine, you know, cardiovascular stuff with repeated sort of strength exercises, and that's when you kind of think about, you know, pairing your cardio with your strength and shortening rest periods of strength to get that sort of fast return of, because it is all about your body adapting to what you've trained. So, but that's kind of, I think, beyond what we need to...
What we want to talk about, yeah. I'm sort of starting to go into hormones and the anabolic response, which it upregulates when you have shorter rest periods, but the longer the rest period, the more neuromuscular recovery you get, so the heavier the load you can lift. And that's really all we want you to know about there.
Yeah, so I think that hopefully should cover it pretty... like as a good overall sort of thing, and see how, you know, it's good that someone else is making these decisions for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's definitely like when I, you know, if I've been away from the gym and I'm having to like schedule my own programming, you can just get so sort of lost being like, oh, but I want this and I want this. And so having that bigger picture of, you know, fitting your plan into a year and then into smaller cycles, and then into, you know, smaller cycles again, and having a real plan behind it is just so key for that idea of periodization and progressive overload. Like, you're only going to get past these sort of plateaus if you actually think about this stuff and you get it right.
And it is so nice. It is so nice to have someone else do your programming. I try and get other people to do my programming even, you know, and it just makes it so that you can just go into the gym and focus on what you're doing.
Yeah, we were just talking about the other day how we were like, oh, it's just so nice sometimes just doing the classes here at the gym, because it's just like,
because you don't have to think, you know. 100%. And I do that from time to time just to jump in with the guys, and it is really nice just to go through and do the set workout. Now, the last thing I want to talk about that really brings this programming in, and we'll do this very quick because we're out of time, is that you want to be recording this stuff. So you want to have a program card. We use Excel spreadsheets here at Unity Gym. We share them with our tribe in the online coaching, and you record your sets, your reps, your weight, because what gets recorded gets improved. You can analyze it, you can improve it, and you can track your progress really nicely. And
it's also such an interesting, like, good resource for if an injury happens.
Yeah.
Like, if it's not even acute injuries, it is kind of interesting, but especially with those sort of niggly ones that come up out of nowhere, like, often you can just, you know, if you look back over the program and you think like, okay, there's where things have changed really quickly, or it's often when there's big sort of shifts in how you do things and really stressing different energy systems or stressing different, that's where it gets.
Now, guys, we have to
before we go. Okay. Dave Clark did ask a question about with flexibility.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Get to that.
Okay.
Really quickly.
We don't have Rad here, who's usually the timekeeper, who would have wrapped this up 5 minutes ago. So Dave Clark saying, is one of these high rep light weights or low rep heavyweight ranges better for flexibility? The answer straight up, mate, is neither of them are better. You want to still be undulating between this, but with flexibility training, the more you spend time in the position, it's arguably better, because it's about the brain and the nervous system adapting and feeling strong and secure in that range of motion. And it's more just about consistency, frequency, and that sort of thing.
If you think about, you know, with that kind of the brain trusting certain ranges of motion, you could probably see how it would be probably quite stressful if you suddenly go into a heavy weighted, like, end range position. And so often, like, if you kind of think about structuring, get your exercises to gradually expose first with, you know, lower weight, and then if you are wanting to stress a higher weight into that position, then build up the weights. And
I'll also argue that you do not need super heavy loads for stretching, for flexibility training. A lot of people really get that a little bit confused. I see people Jefferson curling with, you know, and I've got friends who Jefferson curl their own body weight, you know, and I don't think it's necessary. I don't think you need to go super heavy. You can get
such great results from, you know, doing it arguably safer.
This is the thing. It's risk. It comes down to risk versus reward, and the reward is not anywhere near as good as like how risky it is.
Rad doing his Van Damme sort of, you know, splits across 2 boxes and then holding a weight. He's holding a 5 kilo weight.
Like that's exactly right. Exactly. All right, guys. For those of you in the UMS online coaching, jump over to the online coaching group now. We're going to wrap this up and get the stream going over there. And for everyone else, Remember, today we are launching the version 2 of the 18-minute stretching routine. It's very exciting. This has been our amazingly our most successful program to date. The original. This is an evolution of. So, like we've been talking about here, progressing exercise selection, progressing loading variables. That's what this is about. For anyone who's enjoyed that original 18-minute stretch routine, you have to grab this. This is going to be a really great progression for you. For anyone else, it's still a great program. Rad did scale some of the movements back and demonstrate how a beginner can do them as well. I believe you should get both the programs because they're both amazing and they're both very different. Anyway, we'll see you all Monday, guys. Have a fantastic weekend for those of you in Australia. For everyone else around the world, enjoy Thursday and another working day tomorrow. Take care. Health is about performance, not just body image.
You better be willing to accept what you're going to have to do to get there.
We'll start focusing on movement goals, strength goals, flexibility goals.
When you nail that skill, it's there forever.
The body image goal doesn't get you that
It's
far.
the consistency and frequency that's going to get you there. It's not the intensity.
There's no shortcuts to mastery and movement. Destination doesn't change overnight, but your direction will.
The gym is not the place to beat up the body that you hate. It's the place to build the body that you love.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.